Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. August 8th, 1969. The sun had set hours ago over the quiet hills, leaving behind only a faint glow in the sky and a hush over the winding streets. Up on Cielo Drive, nestled among the oak trees and hedges, a house sat at the end of a private driveway. 10050 Cielo Drive. To passing cars, it appeared ordinary. A Hollywood home, rented by actress Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski. Polanski was away in Europe. Tate, 8 months pregnant, stayed behind with a few close friends. Earlier in the evening, neighbors had heard laughter and music drifting out of the house. Guests had come and gone over the summer. The home was a kind of haven for young artists and friends of Polanski and Tate, filled with the carefree spirit of late 60s Hollywood. But by midnight, the house fell quiet. And then, faint noises. A scream, muffled by distance. A man's voice, shouting something unintelligible. A dog barking, then silence again. A few neighbors later said they'd heard it, though no one called the police. In the city, strange noises often went unexplained. Sometime after 4 a.m., a housekeeper arrived. She parked at the gate and began to walk up the long, sloped driveway. The dawn light was just beginning to brighten the sky, revealing the landscape in gray and blue hues. But something felt wrong. As she approached, the housekeeper noticed a car parked haphazardly outside. The gate hung open, its latch smeared with something dark. She stopped, staring. Then she saw the words scrawled on the front door, written in what she thought was paint. Pig. She ran to a neighbor's house, screaming for help. When police arrived shortly after, they entered the home cautiously, guns drawn. What they found inside stunned even the most hardened officers. 5 bodies sprawled across the living room and front lawn. The victims included Sharon Tate and her unborn child, as well as her friends Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and a young man named Stephen Parent, who had been visiting the caretaker's house nearby. Blood covered the floors, the walls, the victims themselves. The sheer brutality of the killings defied comprehension. Messages had been written in blood on the walls and the door. Word of the murders spread quickly through the city. Headlines screamed of a Hollywood massacre. Panic set in among the rich and famous. People in the hills hired bodyguards, bought guns, and installed alarm systems. If someone could slaughter a pregnant actress and her friends in their own home, no one felt safe. But as officers examined the scene that morning, one question loomed over all others. Who could have done this? And why? The answers, they would soon learn, led far beyond Cielo Drive, into the desert, into a forgotten movie set, and into the mind of a man who called himself Jesus and the devil. Charles Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was just 16 at the time, a runaway and a heavy drinker with little interest in raising a child. His father vanished before he was born, and his last name came from a short-lived stepfather. From the beginning, Manson's life was marked by instability. Kathleen spent time in prison for robbery when Charlie was a young boy, leaving him in the care of distant relatives. He never stayed in one place long. Even as a child, he lied, stole, and ran away from homes and schools. By the time he was a teenager, he'd already been sent to reform school for auto theft. Those early years hardened him. Manson learned how to manipulate, to survive by charm and deceit. But behind his smile was anger, at his mother, at authority, at a world he felt had abandoned him. In and out of institutions, Manson spent much of his young adulthood behind bars. In prison, he learned to play guitar, studied books on hypnosis and philosophy, and absorbed bits of Scientology and Christianity. Fellow inmates remembered him as talkative and odd, sometimes quoting the Bible one moment and threatening violence the next. By the time he was released in 1967, he had spent more than half his life locked up. Prison had become home. "Oh no, you can't let me out," he reportedly told the warden. "I can't make it out there." But the world outside had changed. The summer of love was in full bloom in San Francisco, and America was in the midst of a counterculture revolution. Manson headed straight for the Haight-Ashbury district, a neighborhood teeming with young people searching for something, peace, love, drugs meaning. To Manson, it was a fertile ground. With his guitar slung over his shoulder, he walked the streets looking for anyone who might listen. He had a way of making people feel seen. He'd tell a young runaway that she was beautiful, that she had a place with him. He'd preach about love and freedom, while quietly testing the limits of their loyalty. Soon, a small group began following him. Women mostly. Many were barely out of their teens, from middle-class homes, disillusioned by their families and the world around them. To them, Manson was magnetic. He spoke of love, of liberation from the material world, of a new way of living beyond society's rules. In reality, Manson was laying the foundation of control. The group crisscrossed California in an old school bus, living on the fringes, scrounging for food, playing music, and taking LSD. Manson used the drugs not just for fun, but to break down his followers' sense of self, making them more pliable. By the fall of 1968, the growing family, as they now called themselves, found a new home, Spahn Ranch. The dusty, ramshackle movie set north of Los Angeles would become their base and the backdrop to a chilling transformation. But long before the murders that made his name infamous, Manson was already practicing the same art he'd learned as a boy: manipulation, deception, and control. And now, for the first time, he had a stage and an audience eager to believe. At Spahn Movie Ranch, just outside Chatsworth in the San Fernando Valley, the Manson family finally settled. The ranch had once been a bustling Western film set, but by 1968 it had fallen into disrepair. Its owner, George Spahn, was elderly and nearly blind, content to let Manson and his followers live there in exchange for small favors: cleaning, caretaking, and the company of a few of the young women. For Manson, the ranch offered more than just shelter. It was isolated, yet close enough to Los Angeles for his Hollywood ambitions. It also provided the perfect environment to nurture his growing sense of power. By now, the family had grown to dozens. Most were women, many still teenagers, who had been drawn in by Manson's promises of love, belonging, and freedom. He renamed some of them. Mary Brunner became Mother Mary. Lynette from became Squeaky, named after the sound she made when George Spahn pinched her. Susan Atkins was Sadie Mae. Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and others rounded out the core group. The family was not just a group of wanderers anymore. They were a commune, united under Manson's philosophy. Every day revolved around his whims. They listened as he preached about the end of the world, about racial conflict and social collapse. He mixed scripture, rock lyrics, and his own apocalyptic visions into rambling monologues. He told them they were chosen, that the outside world was corrupt, and that only he could lead them to safety. He began calling his prophecy Helter Skelter, borrowing the name from a Beatles song. To the family, it became a kind of gospel. Life at the ranch blurred into a haze of drugs, group sex, and constant reinforcement of Manson's dominance. He deliberately broke down their identities, convincing them that nothing outside the family mattered. Not their parents, not the law, not even their own lives. When one member expressed doubt, Manson would take them aside, remind them of what he'd given them, and ask quietly, "Would you die for me?" Most answered yes. Those who stayed believed they were building something pure and revolutionary, apart from society they'd rejected. Yet even as they danced under the desert moon, sang Beatles songs, and cared for newborn babies, Manson's mood darkened. His talk of love and peace was giving way to anger and resentment. At Hollywood, at the establishment, and at a world he believed had stolen what was rightfully his. The family was ready to follow him anywhere. And soon, he would ask them to follow him into darkness. Spahn Ranch in the late 1960s was a place out of time. Long since abandoned by the studios that once shot cowboy serials and Western films there, the dusty property still retained its crooked wooden buildings, dirt trails, and the faint smell of horses. To Manson and his followers, it was more than a home. It was a stage where they acted out his vision of an alternate world. Days at the ranch were disorienting, almost dreamlike. Family members woke with the sun, often sleeping in clusters on the floor or in tattered shacks. Breakfast, if there was any, was whatever scraps could be found or stolen. Manson kept them hungry, both physically and emotionally, reinforcing their dependence on him. They took long rides on the ranch's horses, wandering into the hills. They gathered in circles to sing and play music, led by Manson on guitar. At night, they dropped LSD and lay under the stars, listening to him preach. George Spahn, nearly blind, tolerated the group. The women helped guide him around, cooked his meals, and made his bed. He nicknamed many of them affectionately, not just Squeaky, but others too, and largely ignored their strange rituals as long as his few needs were met. From the outside, the family looked like just another hippie commune. To law enforcement, they were a nuisance at most, sometimes suspected of petty theft or drug use, but never taken seriously. Few understood what was really happening in the minds of those at the ranch. Manson's control was psychological, subtle but absolute. He insisted they abandon their birth names, their past lives. He dictated when they could speak, when they could sleep, even when they could make eye contact. Those who questioned him were humiliated in front of the group, then coaxed back into line with quiet promises. The LSD served a purpose too. Manson often dosed himself lightly while giving others much stronger hits. In their vulnerable, tripping states, he would whisper his philosophy that society was doomed, that a race war was coming, and that the family would survive in a hidden underground city until the fighting ended. He claimed to have learned these truths by listening to the Beatles' White Album, which he believed contained hidden messages meant for him. Helter Skelter, he explained, was not just a song. It was a prophecy of the coming chaos. He taught them to see the lyrics as coded instructions, calling for them to act. To prepare, the family began drills. They practiced hiding in caves and desert shacks, stockpiling stolen supplies. They learned to move silently, to creep through the night, to kill animals with knives as a kind of test. The fun-loving air of their early days began to fade. Manson stopped speaking of peace and instead fixated on revenge against a world he believed had rejected him. He promised his followers that soon they would strike the first blow, sparking Helter Skelter and proving their loyalty beyond doubt. And on warm summer nights at the ranch, he began quietly choosing who among them would carry out his plan. Even as he preached about the end of the world, Charles Manson still clung to another dream: fame. Music had always been central to his identity. In prison, he practiced guitar obsessively, modeling himself after artists like Elvis Presley and the Beatles. After arriving in San Francisco, he often played for his followers, improvising songs with hypnotic melodies and cryptic lyrics. To the family, he wasn't just a leader, he was a prophet and a star. But Manson wanted more than the adoration of his small circle. He wanted a record deal. Through one of his early followers, Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys came into his orbit. In the spring of 1968, Wilson picked up 2 hitchhiking family members and brought them back to his home. Before long, the family had moved into Wilson's house, eating his food, driving his cars, and costing him thousands of dollars. At first, Wilson was intrigued by Manson. He introduced him to other musicians and even recorded Manson's songs in his home studio. But the relationship soured as Manson's demands grew. Wilson eventually cut ties, leaving Manson feeling betrayed. Still, Manson pushed forward. He met record producer Terry Melcher, the son of actress Doris Day, through Wilson's connections. Melcher visited Spahn Ranch to hear Manson perform. Family members cleaned the ranch for his arrival, and Manson played song after song, hoping to impress him. But nothing came of it. Melcher declined to sign him. For Manson, the rejection was devastating. His music had been his way out, his claim to legitimacy. When the door to fame slammed shut, his anger deepened. He began speaking of the phony people in Hollywood, the liars and thieves who wouldn't give him what he deserved. Later, he learned that Melcher had once rented the house at 10050 Cielo Drive, the same house Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski now occupied. To Manson, it was a sign. In his mind, the rejection by the music industry and the betrayal by Wilson and Melcher were not just personal slights. They were part of the same corrupt system he claimed to oppose. He told his followers that the beautiful people of Hollywood would pay for turning their backs on him. Fame eluded him, but infamy was within reach. And at Spawn Ranch, he began to speak more openly of violence, no longer just as prophecy, but as plan. By late 1968, Charles Manson's vision of the future had taken on a darker, more urgent tone. Around campfires at Spawn Ranch, he would gather his family and speak of Helter Skelter, his name for the chaos he believed was about to engulf America. He told them it was inevitable, a race war between black and white, sparked by the growing unrest of the late 1960s. But Manson insisted the family would not be victims of this chaos. They would be its masters. In his telling, the black population of the United States would rise up against white society, slaughtering millions. But they would be unable to govern themselves. At the height of the violence, the family, having hidden in a secret underground city beneath Death Valley, would emerge to take control and rule over the survivors. It was a bizarre mixture of biblical imagery, popular music, and his own paranoid interpretation of current events. Yet to his followers, many of them young and adrift, it sounded like purpose. Manson believed he had found proof of his prophecy in the Beatles' 1968 White Album. He claimed that songs like Piggies, Blackbird, and Helter Skelter contained coded messages about the coming war. He told the family that the Beatles were the four angels mentioned in the Book of Revelation, and that he was their fifth angel destined to lead. "Don't you hear what they're saying?" he would ask, playing the record over and over. Manson described Helter Skelter as the moment when blood would run in the streets, when society would collapse, and when he and his followers would ascend to power. But as 1969 wore on, Manson grew frustrated. He saw the world outside carrying on, seemingly oblivious to his warnings. He became convinced that Helter Skelter would not begin on its own. It needed a spark. He told the family it was their duty to ignite the war. The plan was simple but chilling. They would murder wealthy white people in their homes, leaving messages at the scene to frame black militants. Police would assume the killings were part of an uprising. When the panic spread, the violence would escalate into the all-out war Manson had predicted. The family members, conditioned by months of drugs, isolation, and manipulation, accepted the idea. They no longer saw themselves as individuals. They were extensions of Manson's will. He began testing their commitment. At one point, he ordered a family member to stab a man during a drug dispute. And when she hesitated, he reminded her, "If you're not willing to kill for me, you're not ready to die for me." Others proved themselves ready. In the summer of 1969, Manson assembled a small team. He handpicked the ones he trusted most: Charles Tex, Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. He handed them knives, a gun, and instructions. It was time to begin Helter Skelter, and their first target would be the house on Cielo Drive. On the night of August 8th, 1969, members of the Manson family climbed into a car outside Spawn Ranch. Charles Tex, Watson, was at the wheel. Beside him were three women: Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. They carried knives, a .22 caliber revolver, and rope. Manson himself stayed behind. He had given them their orders, and Watson repeated them aloud as they drove through the dark canyons toward Benedict Canyon. "Totally destroy everyone in that house, as gruesome as you can. Make it look like the Black Panthers did it. Make it shock the world." Their destination was 10050 Cielo Drive, a house Manson believed still belonged to record producer Terry Melcher. They arrived just after midnight. Watson cut the phone lines, then led the women up the sloping driveway. The house was quiet. The first victim was Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old who had stopped by to visit the caretaker. As he was leaving in his car, Watson appeared at the driver's side window and shot him 4 times, killing him instantly. Watson and the women then entered the house. Inside were actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, and her friends: hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and writer Wojciech Frykowski. Watson herded them into the living room, waving the gun and shouting, "I am the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." What followed was nearly unimaginable. Sebring was shot and stabbed to death as he tried to protect Tate. Frykowski managed to break free briefly, but was caught on the lawn and stabbed repeatedly. Abigail Folger fled through a bedroom window, but was overtaken on the front lawn and killed. Inside the house, Sharon Tate pleaded for the life of her unborn baby. "Don't kill me," she begged. "I just want to have my baby." Susan Atkins later admitted to holding Tate down as she was stabbed 16 times. When it was over, Watson and the women scrawled the word "pig" on the front door in Sharon Tate's blood. They discarded their bloody clothes, returned to the car, and drove away into the night, leaving behind a scene of chaos and terror. The next morning, police arrived to find the bodies where they had fallen, sprawled across the living room and lawn. Blood covered the walls, the floor, the victims. The brutality stunned even seasoned detectives. And the randomness of the attack, a young actress, her friends, a teenage visitor, sent shockwaves through Los Angeles. Newspapers ran banner headlines: "Hollywood Massacre." Rumors spread through the city. Drug deal gone wrong? Jealous lovers? A satanic cult? For the family, though, it was just the beginning. When they returned to Spahn Ranch that morning, Manson surveyed them calmly. The world still hadn't caught fire yet. So the next night, he decided they would strike again. The next night, August 9th, 1969, Charles Manson decided to take a more active role. The murders on Cielo Drive had not unleashed the chaos he envisioned. The city still seemed calm, oblivious to what he believed was coming. So he gathered the same group, Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Kasabian, and added Leslie Van Houten and Steve Grogan. This time, he accompanied them. They drove aimlessly at first, looking for a new target. Manson wanted to show them exactly how it should be done. Eventually, they arrived at the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in Los Feliz. Manson claimed he had been there before, a chance encounter he remembered. The couple was affluent but unremarkable, seemingly chosen at random. Manson entered the house alone, surprising the LaBiancas in their living room. He assured them no harm would come if they cooperated. He tied them up and left, returning to the car to send his followers. Inside, Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten carried out the killings. Leno LaBianca, a supermarket executive, was stabbed dozens of times. A carving fork was left protruding from his stomach, and the word "war" was carved into his abdomen. His wife, Rosemary, was killed in the bedroom, stabbed repeatedly by Krenwinkel and Van Houten. Again, they scrawled words on the walls in blood: "Rise, Death to pigs," and "Helter Skelter," a misspelled homage to Manson's prophecy. Before leaving, they helped themselves to food from the kitchen, wiping down fingerprints as best they could. The next morning, the bodies were discovered by Leno's business associate. This second night of killings plunged Los Angeles into full-scale panic. The randomness of the victims, the sheer savagery, and the cryptic messages suggested something larger: a conspiracy, a cult, something unknown but deeply frightening. Gun shops sold out of ammunition. Guard dogs were in high demand. The city's wealthy retreated behind gates and security alarms, fearing they could be next. At Spahn Ranch, the family acted as if nothing had happened. They sang songs, rode horses, and waited for the world to fall apart. Manson believed he had lit the fuse, but instead of igniting his vision of Helter Skelter, the killings left a trail of clues and a city determined to catch whoever was responsible. At first, investigators struggled to make sense of the two crime scenes. The Cielo Drive murders and the LaBianca killings were not immediately linked. Different precincts handled each case, and the victims seemed to have no connection. But the brutality, the random choice of victims, and the strange messages scrawled in blood hinted at something larger. Police interviewed dozens of people from Sharon Tate's social circle: actors, directors, musicians, even former boyfriends. Rumors of drug deals and occult rituals dominated the headlines, but no clear suspect emerged. Meanwhile, at Spahn Ranch, the Manson family carried on as though nothing had happened. They took more drugs, stole cars, and roamed the desert. What ultimately led detectives to the family was not the murders themselves, but a stolen car ring. On August 16, 1969, sheriff's deputies raided Spawn Ranch on suspicion of auto theft. They arrested Manson and several family members, but quickly released them due to a clerical error. By the fall, detectives began hearing whispers from former family members and other inmates who had crossed paths with Susan Atkins after her arrest on an unrelated charge. In jail, Atkins bragged to fellow inmates about her role in the Tate murders. She described in chilling detail how she held Sharon Tate as she was stabbed, how they scrawled "pig" on the door. Those inmates alerted authorities. Detectives pieced together a timeline. Witnesses placed family members near the crime scenes, and stolen property from the LaBianca home was recovered from some of Manson's followers. A bloody fingerprint on the front door at Cielo Drive was matched to Patricia Krenwinkel. On October 10, 1969, Manson and several others were arrested at Barker Ranch, a remote desert outpost where the family had retreated. By December, the Los Angeles District Attorney announced charges against Manson, Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and later Van Houten. The arrest of Charles Manson and his followers sent shockwaves through the country. Few could reconcile the peaceful, flower child image of the family with the savage violence they were accused of. In jail, Manson continued to manipulate his followers, carving an X into his forehead and instructing them to do the same. For the first time, the name Charles Manson appeared in headlines nationwide, and the world began to see the full extent of the chaos he had unleashed. The trial of Charles Manson and his followers began in June 1970. From the start, it was unlike anything the American public had ever seen. Manson arrived in court with an X carved into his forehead, later turning it into a crude swastika. His followers sat outside the courthouse, chanting, singing, and carving the same marks into their own skin. Inside the courtroom, the testimony was chilling. Susan Atkins recounted how Sharon Tate had begged for her baby's life. Other family members detailed how Manson ordered the murders, directing his followers with quiet authority. Even as evidence mounted, Manson maintained that he had not killed anyone himself. A technical truth, but prosecutors argued persuasively that he had orchestrated everything. His words were weapons, and his control over the family was absolute. In January 1971, Manson, Watson, Atkins, and Krenwinkel were all convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Leslie Van Houten was convicted later that year. All were sentenced to death. Yet the death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment in 1972 when California briefly abolished the death penalty. But Manson's influence lingered. Even behind bars, he continued to attract admirers. Letters poured in from people who saw him as a counterculture antihero. Some former family members refused to renounce him, remaining loyal even as the years passed and the evidence remained undeniable. The Manson murders came to symbolize the end of an era. The hope and idealism of the 1960s, the peace signs, the free love, the music festivals, seemed to collapse under the weight of the violence on Cielo Drive. The counterculture dream had a darker side, and Charles Manson had exposed it. For decades, his image, the wild stare, the cryptic sayings, the swastika, haunted American culture. Books, documentaries, and films revisited the case again and again, each time rekindling fascination with the man who had managed to turn love into chaos, freedom into control, and music into prophecy. Even after his death in 2017 at the age of 83, the name Charles Manson remains synonymous with manipulation, fanaticism, and violence. The family, too, has left its mark, a reminder of how fragile human identity can be and how easily a charismatic leader can twist faith and loyalty into instruments of destruction. It is a story that still chills, not because of what Manson did with his own hands, but because of what he made others willing to do. And because it forces us to ask, under the right conditions, could it happen again? What do you think of today's story? What dark chapter should we open next? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Close the book if you can. This is Black Chapter.